Hey guys, today we'll be reacting to some of my favorite videos that I love to watch. I found out about them a few years ago, really loved watching them, and so I'm like, you know what? Let's react to one of them, see how it does. So today we'll be reacting to, this why Flight 708 fell from the sky from Mayday Air Disasters. Like I said, I love watching these videos, and might as well react to one while we're at it. I was gonna watch it anyways, so let's just make a video at it. So let's go.
A scene of devastation in a remote region of Venezuela confirms
Okay.
the fate of a missing passenger jet. West Caribbean Airways Flight 708 has mysteriously dropped from the sky while flying at over 30,000 feet.
It took off from Panama. It's a Colombian operator. There was 160 French citizens on board.
This is the biggest accident that has ever occurred in Venezuelan territory.
Investigators hope the crew's desperate last words will help them pinpoint the cause of the crash.
Like, I love seeing how they actually figure all this stuff
But
out.
instead, the mystery deepens.
It's a storm, Captain! It's a storm!
The pilots can't agree on why the plane is falling. Now it's up to investigators to figure it out.
Okay, yeah, like I said, I love this. I love the fact how we somewhat know what happened because obviously they already know, but the fact that they investigate a crash and they can figure out what happened, like almost minute by minute, it's amazing. And of course the black boxes and everything else helps with that. But it's just amazing how they can figure this stuff out. The plane that flew too high. Oh, that's probably yeah. See, that's probably one of the reasons they went down.
At Panama's Tocumen International Airport, West Caribbean Airways Flight 708 begins boarding 2 hours behind schedule.
Okay. I've never been on a
It's
delayed
well
plane,
past
so
midnight. The 152 passengers on this charter flight are returning home to Martinique. They've been visiting the Panama Canal. Captain Omar Ospina has just flown in with his crew from Colombia. As he's behind schedule, he must turn the plane around quickly. But there are more unexpected delays. First Officer David Munoz informs the captain that the flight is overbooked. Even the jump seat in the cockpit is filled.
Let me deal with it. Alejo.
I need you on board to do the announcements in Spanish and English.
Yes, sir. Angela and Luisa can stay behind. I'll let them know.
Two of the flight attendants will stay in Panama because there's not enough room on board.
damn.
Sir, we just got the final load sheet.
Checking the weight of the aircraft
Take off from runway 21 left, sir. 3,050 meters.
and the length of the runway, Captain Ospina calculates that he can safely get airborne.
I love planes. I love being in an airport
Their
flying.
flight path will take them
I
through
love
some heavy
planes.
weather, something crews are accustomed to during hurricane season.
Okay, we're ready for takeoff. Request pushback clearance.
Ground, West Caribbean Airways.
708, request pushback clearance, gate 28.
West Caribbean 708.
Cleared for pushback, gate 28. Proceed to runway 21 left.
Planes are just freaking cool. I don't know why. They're just so cool.
Cleared for takeoff.
So I'm guessing everything was routine then. Takeoff, the checklist, everything. It's just when they were in the air, something went wrong.
The V1. Rotate.
At 1 in the morning, Flight 708 begins the journey to Martinique.
They took off from Panama Airport, Tocumen Airport, with a heavy load for a long flight for that aircraft.
The flight should take 3 hours.
They climb up to 31,000 feet.
That's not
Their
bad. 3
initial
hours.
assigned flight level. They have filed a flight plan with a final cruise level of 330, 33,000 feet.
The crew is flying an MD-80. The plane is easily recognizable by its two rear-mounted engines.
The MD-82 aircraft
I've
is
been in a
a very
plane
good
that
aircraft.
small too.
Is
I think it was coming from like
model that
a
was
state up from
derived
where I
from the
live.
DC-9. They
It was just
made
one
it
state over.
longer, more fuel efficient, and more modern instrumentation
I
and
don't know if it was.
avionics.
I think it was even smaller than that.
Anti-ice on, please.
As altitude increases and temperature drops, they activate the plane's anti-ice system. Half an hour into the flight, while cruising at 31,000 feet, the weather ahead is turning nasty. A low-intensity hurricane moving in from the Atlantic has been whipping up winds across the region.
Request deviation left.
I mean, where they're at, it's like a
West
bunch of small
708,
islands. That,
request
yeah, a
deviation
lot of
to the
tropical
left for
storms,
information.
West Caribbean 708, clear to deviate
and
left.
they can appear and disappear with like without knowing. So I'm pretty
The kind
sure
of
this
weather they
hurricane
were
wasn't
flying,
in their
it's common for
radar
pilots
when
to
they took off.
deviate from their initial route to avoid this bad weather.
Yeah.
It should get better soon.
Okay, like I've mentioned, like, yeah, I was in a small plane too. I was with my mom, and we were flying from the one state just to the next state. We were flying because we had made a connection flight from, I believe, L.A. from California all the way to the east, and then we took a connecting flight down to my home state. And so when we did that, it was a smaller plane because we moved to a smaller plane, and so it was very windy and stormy here in the state. So when we arrived, it was very stormy, very like dark, and there was a lot of lightning everywhere. You could see the lights flashing outside when we were trying to land in the airport. And if I tell you not, there was so much turbulence, it felt like the plane was gonna come down. It felt like it was falling apart. The sounds of the wind, the flaps just going up and down, the wings, everything. You can hear everything because everyone in the cabin was so quiet. Everyone was so quiet in that plane. Everyone was just holding on for dear life. The first time it dipped down, they did scream when it went down a little because of the turbulence. Everyone screamed, and then everyone just got quiet. And we're like, "Oh shoot!" Now I was right next to my mom. Like we both had aisle seats right next to each other, and so I just looked at her like, hopefully it'll be fine." And I mean, obviously it was, but the entire flight from like beginning to land all the way until it touched the ground and stopped, everybody was super quiet. You could hear a pin drop in that cabin. It was one of the most terrifying things in my life. I gotta say, one of the most terrifying things, because you have no control. It's like whatever happens happens. And luckily, I mean, that pilot did amazing job landing that plane in those situations because it was horrible. It was a very stormy night, winds, lightning. It was raining hard. I gotta give props to that pilot. And as soon as it landed, of course, everybody cheered, as they should have at that situation. Not just a normal landing, but a landing that could have become catastrophic. Yeah, yeah, that pilot deserves praise, But yeah, that's my story of being in a situation like that. But obviously, this plane has a very different ending.
40 minutes into the flight, the plane has burned
I
through
still fly.
thousands of
Like I love
pounds of
flying.
fuel,
Like
allowing it
I
to
mean, it is
fly
one of the
higher.
safest transportations.
In order to reduce weight, they had to climb to 31,000 feet, wait until the weight goes down, and then do a step climb up to 33,000 feet.
Let's do 330.
330. Barranquilla West 7.
08, request level 330. 708, clear to level 330.
Oh, they got cleared access.
The
Okay.
captain now begins the climb to their scheduled altitude of 33,000 feet.
Yeah, that's where they were supposed to be at, and that's where they're at. But they said it's too high. Did they go even further up? Were their electronics not working then? They might have thought that they were at 33, but they're like, it might have actually been higher than that. Then no, because then what are they called? The air traffic control would have seen that they were higher. It would have let them know, like,
The
hey,
captain notices that the engines don't seem to be responding.
okay.
I'll go to the bathroom.
The crew isn't overly concerned.
Probably should.
Almost a third of the way to Martinique. West Caribbean Flight 708 enters Venezuelan airspace.
Okay. So they've lost power to the engines or control over the engines.
Sure.
As the storm intensifies, First Officer Munoz worries about icing.
Did I turn it on, Captain, or what?
Do we have ice? Put them on.
Yeah, I don't think.
Soon the turbulence gets worse.
I mean, at this point, they shouldn't even be standing. Nobody should be
Put
standing.
the fasten seatbelt sign on.
I never take off my seatbelt during a flight, bro. And never, unless I have to get up to go to the restroom or get up to do anything, my seatbelt is always on. I just feel like it's more comfortable with the seatbelt attached to me.
Stay in your seat.
I never take off my seatbelt. I don't know how people can just... I get it, the comfortability of just moving around and sitting down without being strapped. But in a plane, I feel more comfortable with it on. Just like being in a car.
Down to level 310.
Do it.
Maiquetía, whiskey.
The Maiquetía air traffic control station in Venezuela isn't equipped with radar.
Oh, that sucks. So they can't see that they're
The controller
probably
depends
higher
on
than
pilots
normal.
to tell him where they are.
Ah, man.
Captain Ospina turns off the autopilot,
Give me 310.
and the plane starts heading back down to 31,000 feet.
Okay.
The turbulence is
That's
getting
what
even
sucks about
heavier,
some plane airports or air
and then
traffic
suddenly
controls
the
that they have
stick
no
shaker goes
radar.
off. It's the most serious warning that a crew can get.
Stall?
The captain's control column starts to vibrate, warning him the plane is flying dangerously slowly.
Yeah, it's a stall.
At close to 31,000 feet, the plane suddenly drops.
Oh yeah. Okay, at this point you have to increase speed and dip the nose down. And that's how you stop a stall. From watching all these videos, that's how you stop a stall.
The crew has only seconds to figure
Increase
out why.
speed, dip nose down, which gains even more speed. Boom, and then you have control of the plane yet again.
Level 240.
Descending to 240. Do you have a problem on board?
Affirmative. Tell them we've had a flame out on both engines.
A flame?
Both engines.
No, that's not what you have.
Both engines.
Oh, okay, that's what happened. Confusion on the pilot's side.
Punto Cabello, if possible.
I wouldn't say
The controller
pilot
needs
error.
to know where they are.
Oh shit.
Negative. We are 14,000 feet.
We're 1,000.
And going down. The plane is uncontrollable. Keep your hands down. Stay down. Keep your hands down.
Confirm people on board.
Yeah.
Intention.
And distance from that main if it's possible.
152 people on board and the plane's uncontrollable.
In just 30 seconds, the plane falls 9,000 feet.
Damn.
I understand. 152 people on board.
Affirmative.
Acknowledge. Confirm.
At what level you are crossing at this time? Whiskey.
Charlie. Whiskey. Charlie. Whiskey. 708.
Confirm position if possible.
Whiskey. Charlie. Whiskey. 708. Confirm position if possible.
While flying almost 10 kilometers.
Yeah, that was a lot of pilot error, I guess. They didn't know what was happening. They just said engine blowout or something like that. meaning that both their engines blew out and they lost the engines, which kinda in a way. I mean, they did lose engine control, engine power. They were going slow, but I don't think that was the cause. They were flying fine. Like I said, they couldn't. All they had to do. I say all they have to do, but like that is one of the ways to stop a stall is increase speed and then dip your nose down, and that stops the stall.
While
But
flying almost
I
10
don't know. We
kilometers
don't know
above the
everything yet.
Earth, West Caribbean 708 mysteriously drops from the sky.
Yeah.
Air traffic control in Venezuela doesn't know its location, nor if anyone has survived.
I don't think anyone would survive that. And direct impact to the ground.
The morning after West Caribbean Flight 708 goes missing, Venezuelan villagers report that a plane has crashed on a remote farm. Colonel Lourdes Ramos is the lead air crash investigator for the Venezuelan government. She has never handled a crash this big. She's shocked by what she sees.
Yeah.
All 160 people on board, most of them French citizens from Martinique, have died.
French citizens?
Sí, fue muy impresionante para nosotros porque era nuestro primer accidente.
It was a real shock for us because it was our first really big accident, and it had the highest number of deaths for any crash in Venezuela. We felt a lot of pressure because of that.
The scope of the investigation is daunting. Lourdes Ramos knows the plane that has crashed is one of the safest planes in the world. There are more than 3,000 such planes flying every day.
Investigating a crash where an aircraft so popular as the MD-80 is a great responsibility because of the effects they could have on the rest of the fleet.
The Colombian, Venezuelan, and French press from Martinique all descend on the site demanding answers.
Immediately like, hey, give us the answer.
The plane has crashed in a lawless area next to the Colombian border. Kidnappings are common. The Venezuelan army informs investigators that it can only protect them during daylight hours.
We don't have a lot of time. Let's get everything documented.
Ciertamente, el equipo no estábamos incluyendo.
Certainly our team, including myself, wasn't prepared for the emergency we faced.
El accidente
Yeah, I'm pretty sure you weren't.
Complejo y muy difícil poder.
This accident was complex, and it was very difficult to quickly figure out what had happened.
De lo que había sucedido.
After the victims have been removed, the investigators' first goal is to determine how much of the plane landed intact at the crash site. If it's all there, they can rule
tell
out a mid-air breakup.
when parts are broken before the crash somehow.
We could observe the four corners of the aircraft, the tail, a part of the cockpit, and some remains of the wings. And this suggested that there were no explosions or a collision that produced the accident.
Explosiones o algún acto que produjera ese accidente.
Investigators question the Maiquetía air traffic controller.
Told me that they had a flameout on both their engines. Do you have a problem on board?
Tell them we've had flameout on both engines.
Yeah, that was wrong.
Cuando recibimos la información
They
del Centro de
immediately look at
Control
the
de
engine and
Maiquetía,
see no flame
When
up.
we learned that the crew had reported a flameout in both engines, we immediately focused on the function of the airplane's
see?
engines.
se fue al funcionamiento de los motores de la aeronave.
Yeah, I'm just getting up to speed now.
Joe Sidor is a senior investigator at the NTSB in Washington, specializing in foreign assignments.
As soon as we're notified of an accident, we contact the manufacturer of both the airframe and the engine. Given the initial information of a dual engine flameout, this caused us to start getting as much information about the engines as possible.
No sign of fire inside the engine.
Laura Lease had her hands full with this accident. It was a remote location, there was 4 countries involved, and she didn't have a big staff.
Let's see what we can find out about the weather they flew through.
Colonel Ramos knows that severe storms can kill a plane's jet engines. In 1977, a DC-9 with similarly mounted rear engines experienced a flameout while flying through a thunderstorm. Both engines were disabled. The plane fell 17,000 feet, slammed to the ground, and erupted in flames. Investigators
But there wasn't
suspect
much
that the
ice.
engines of Flight 708 may have flamed
Maybe
out
water?
either from heavy rain entering them or due to turbulent winds.
One way to think of an engine flameout is when you have a pilot light go out on your furnace at home. The engine is working properly with combustion going on internally, and then the flame stops and the engine quits.
If both engines flamed out, it would explain why the plane fell from the sky in one piece. But Colonel Ramos knows that her best chance of finding out exactly what happened to the engines lies with the plane's 2 black boxes. They could hold critical flight and voice data. But retrieving that data gets complicated by political concerns.
The black box. Even though they're
The other
orange.
difficulty with this investigation was the international aspect. This was a Colombia operator that took off from Panama, was overflying Venezuela, and crashed on their soil. So from the Venezuelan standpoint, they had very little connection with the actual flight or the passengers on the aircraft.
True, true. They
The
were just
Venezuelan
there.
government, deeply mistrustful of the United States, has the final say on who will examine the black boxes.
Since this is a United States manufactured aircraft, we offered our facility to them to download both the FDR and CVR. But they requested that they be downloaded at the French facility of the BEA, our counterparts in Paris.
The black boxes are sent to France for expert analysis.
The French aviation authorities participated in the accident investigation because all the passengers were French citizens that lived in Martinique.
In the meantime, investigators pursue another possible cause of engine failure: contaminated fuel.
Oh, yeah.
They track
true.
down the fuel truck that filled the plane in Panama.
Fue importante examinar el combustible.
It was important to
That's
test the
happened before.
fuel because it
There
was
was
a
a lot of
possible
water in the
cause for
fuel.
why the engines had failed.
Que habían fallado los motores. Esa era una posible causa.
El análisis del combustible por búsqueda de contaminación
We asked the Panamanian authorities to test the fuel for contaminants, but the results they obtained were negative.
fueron negativos los resultados.
Hi. Hope I can be some help.
Joe Sador arrives from Washington with 2 engine experts.
Once we arrived on scene, that was one of the first things that we wanted to look at was the engines. So my engine investigator and the Pratt & Whitney investigator went to each engine and examined them thoroughly.
What they find is surprising.
Both engines exhibited indications of high-speed rotation at impact. That is to say that the evidence indicated that both engines were operating at a very high power.
The investigators give the engines a clean bill of health.
So they were operating at a high power, but why did the plane slow down then for the stall?
Cuando obtuvimos los resultados del
When we obtained the analyst results for the engines, we realized that they work perfectly.
trabajaron
They were working,
perfectamente.
but they weren't giving out the power that they were supposed to.
Affirmative. Tell them we've had a flameout on both engines. We've had a flameout on both engines.
Sure looks like those blades are turning when the plane hit the ground.
And that the flameout reported by the crew never happened.
Flameout nunca ocurrió.
The main suspect in the crash of one of the most popular planes on Earth is ruled out. Investigators need another lead.
It made us want to get that FDR and CVR data as quickly as possible.
The team is now counting on the plane's 2 black boxes to shed light on the cause of the crash. They travel to France, where one of the boxes has been opened. When they listen to the plane's cockpit voice recorder, investigators are surprised by what they hear.
Luego de escucharla,
After listening to the cockpit voice recordings, we realized that the plane had entered a stall.
había entrado en pérdida.
Yeah, and this is what they're gonna explain. Okay, so they know it's a stall, but they didn't do anything to stop the stall.
Feet with 2 working engines.
Exactly.
To create the lift needed to fly, a plane depends on a very fast-moving stream of air over the wings.
An airplane stall is when the lift over the wings is reduced to the point that the lift cannot support the weight of the aircraft in the air.
It's unusual for planes to stall at such a high altitude.
Yeah.
Investigators hope the plane's second black box
At a high
will reveal
altitude.
why that happened.
At a high altitude, to stall, the plane needs to its nose needs to be up, because then the winds would be hitting the bottom of the plane, causing it to drag, stop, and then fall down. Yeah, what happened?
Cuando abrimos los registradores de vuelo,
When we opened the flight data recorder, even though it was really damaged, the conditions inside were good, and that was a huge relief.
buenas. Y realmente fue un alivio encontrarlos en buen estado.
But for some reason, much of what's on the recorder is gibberish.
Unfortunately, some of the data was not usable.
Why?
And it was some very important data points that were not available, such as elevator position, rudder position, heading, and the most important parameters, engine pressure ratios.
It's a disappointing loss for Sador.
Oh, they barely have anything to go from.
We need those engine parameters.
The engine pressure numbers would tell investigators how much power the engines were generating. They would paint a picture of how the airplane was flying in its final minutes. In Washington, the NTSB offers to help. Sophisticated software may be able to recapture some of the lost data.
We wanted to work with what data we had to recover any engine data that we could.
Meanwhile, investigators look for other clues about what may have caused the stall.
That's quite a storm. Probably very heavy rain.
They discover that the plane flew through freezing, wet weather, capable of causing ice to form. Ice on the wings can cause a plane to stall.
Really?
When ice accumulates on an airplane, it will have increased drag and increased weight and decreased lift.
Okay,
the
makes sense.
MD-80 is equipped with an anti-icing system. When
They
turned
turned it
on,
on.
it blows hot air from the engines onto the wings, preventing ice from forming.
Let's see what they did about the ice.
Unless they turned it on too late.
Put on the fasten seatbelt sign. Man, that is a lot of nasty weather.
As the plane rose to 33,000 feet, Captain Ospina made an unusual decision.
Turn off engine anti-icing.
A short while later, First Officer Munoz wants to know if the anti-icing system should be put back on.
Did I turn it on, Captain?
Do we have ice?
Pilots
Oh, so
generally
he says,
examine
yeah.
the outside metal windowsill to see whether ice is forming there.
Put him on.
It appears the captain saw ice.
Barranquilla West 70.
Since they were flying through cold and wet conditions, investigators don't know why the crew didn't simply turn on the anti-ice and leave it on.
Durante el vuelo,
With the weather conditions they had, they should have been using the anti-ice systems during the entire flight.
antihielo durante todo el vuelo.
Investigators wonder if the crew made an error that allowed ice to build up on the plane's wings, causing it to stall, and fall from the sky.
Can you even, like, generate that in a
Promising new
simulator?
evidence in the crash of West Caribbean Flight 708 may help the investigative team to zero in on the cause of the disaster. The NTSB has managed to recover missing data.
Oh, they did. Wow.
About the MD-80's engines.
This was very important for us because it allowed us to understand the operation of the engine throughout the flight.
If there had been ice on the wings, the engines would have had to work harder to overcome the friction it creates. The engine power numbers would have gone up.
Look at this. Engine power wasn't going up, it was actually going down.
Yeah, it was going down.
Therefore, that showed that there was no ice on the airframe.
They're losing power.
Ice didn't
why?
cause the storm. So what did? Investigators must determine why the engines weren't providing the power needed to keep the MD-80 in the air.
Maybe electrical problem?
The airline's
Fuel?
troubled
No, they had
history
fuel.
of safety violations gives investigators a possible lead. It had been cited for flying overweight planes.
Colombian authorities used to bring the aircraft to a
Okay.
scale they have at Bogota Airport and compare against the manifest. And in some occasions, they found that the aircraft was heavier than what was reported.
Did Flight 708 stall in midair because it was too heavy?
Durante la visita que se realizó a Panamá,
During our visit to Panama, we observed that West Caribbean didn't have very rigorous control over the checking of passengers' luggage and their weight.
de los pasajeros.
If a plane is too heavy, it may not be able to fly at higher altitudes where the air is less dense.
But that's...
Pilots need to make these calculations
Would
carefully.
the plane being too much weight actually lose engine power?
The pilot knows at what altitude he can fly by studying the aircraft's performance tables and inputting the plane's weight and the temperature.
What investigators don't know is whether Captain Ospina did the maths correctly.
Stand by.
They now try to calculate whether Flight 708 was too heavy to avoid stalling at 33,000 feet.
So we went back and looked at the number of passengers on board, the number of crew on board, and the weight of the aircraft itself, along with the baggage.
They already tested the plane at its reported weight of 148,000 pounds.
What if it was more?
All right, let's add a few thousand pounds. We got heavier luggage, misweighed cargo.
Let's try 155,000 pounds.
Investigators now make the calculations for a plane that's grossly overweight. They're in for a surprise.
And even with a heavier aircraft at takeoff, the aircraft could maintain level flight at 330.
So it
It's a
wasn't weight.
setback for the investigation.
We're missing something.
Let's go back to the beginning.
After much research, investigators still can't figure out what caused the plane to stall.
Until something miraculously happens. AC? What?
Thanks.
Oh.
The answer has to do with how a plane distributes power.
Oh, okay. The de-icing. When they turned it on.
When it's turned on, the anti-icing system draws energy from the engines, reducing power for thrust.
Oh.
This decrease in thrust can affect the performance of the airplane depending on the weight and the altitude. So the performance study showed that the
You
airplane
see
was
how-
perfectly safe to fly at 33,000 feet with the anti-ice off.
Anti-ice on, please.
However, it could only fly as high as 31,900 feet with the anti-ice on.
And they were
It
at
was the
33.
anti-icing.
Rob them of the power they needed.
They shouldn't have gone higher than 31.9.
Okay, so now the title makes sense. The plane that flew too high.
We concluded that the aircraft was flown too high for its weight and the weather conditions it faced.
With anti-icing on. It was fine if they hadn't put it on.
Started to decelerate when the flight crew turned on the anti-ice system.
Yeah.
This reduced the thrust of the engine.
Investigators conclude the reduction in thrust led the plane to stall.
Sir, we just got the final load sheet.
They now assume that when Captain Ospina calculated his maximum cruise altitude, he failed to factor in the need for anti-icing.
There are many factors they have to take into account when planning, and apparently they did not do it in this case.
Yeah, pilot error.
But if low thrust led to a stall, why didn't the crew notice? Part of the answer is that while the problem was developing, they weren't flying the plane.
They had their autopilot on.
The autopilot should not let a plane stall. Investigators wonder why this particular autopilot let that happen.
AI wasn't that great back then.
While researching the autopilot on the MD-80, they discover a bulletin from the plane's manufacturer. It was sent to the airline 3 years earlier.
Under some conditions, airspeed could decay to stall warning before the autopilot disconnects.
In the bulletin issued by Boeing, it described another incident with an autopilot that was almost the exact same as what had happened with West Caribbean.
The bulletin warned crews that if they set the autopilot to maintain the plane's altitude, they should keep a close eye on their airspeed.
The operation bulletin warned that with the autopilot on and at altitude, that a similar situation could occur, where the aircraft could maintain altitude and airspeed could decrease if the pilots were not monitoring the airspeed.
Okay, so it wasn't full on autopilot.
Altitude, as the speed goes down,
it didn't fix
the
itself.
aircraft starts to pitch up, nose up attitude, increasing the angle of attack to have a better lift. But that has a problem because you cannot exceed certain angle because you can enter stall condition.
Yep, like I mentioned earlier. Yep.
In this case, the autopilot led the aircraft into a condition that caused an excessive angle of attack. That generated the stall.
As important as the bulletin was, there's no evidence that it ever reached West Caribbean's pilots. Investigators now have a deeper understanding of the events causing the stall. The crew were not monitoring their instruments, believing that the autopilot would maintain the correct speed. They were wrong. It was at this moment that the captain began to notice that something wasn't right.
Yeah, see?
I can't accelerate. Don't go to the bathroom.
That they were aware that they had a problem, but they didn't know why.
The captain decided to descend to an altitude where the engines would perform better.
310. And descending to 31,000 feet was the right choice. That's why he disconnected the autopilot to begin the descent.
Give me 310.
The plane is very close to stalling, but the crew is just a few seconds away from overcoming the problem.
If he would have attained 31,000 feet, during that descent, the speed would have gone up and he would have recovered the lift, and after leveling off, there will have been no problem at all.
They almost made it, but the captain was oblivious to his biggest threat. The plane is still traveling slowly, with its nose raised at a dangerously high angle.
Okay, why?
That's when the crew experienced some bad luck. The weather they were flying through was turbulent, winds were intense, and the plane was vulnerable.
Our study showed that it would only take a 20-mile-an-hour updraft to push the aircraft into a stall.
Investigators conclude that the plane was hit with a ferocious updraft that lifted the plane's nose just enough to put it into a stall. A crisis the crew then mishandled.
There was very little communication between them. The captain thought he was having a flameout in both engines.
Yeah. Like they should see their instruments and notice that their nose is getting close to a stalling position.
The captain was not telling the first
So they
officer
should,
what to do.
you know, lower their nose.
The captain was
But
only
I'm not a pilot. I don't know.
or if
I don't
you will
know
have tunnel
how to
vision
fly a plane.
on the engines, which is a very big problem in this situation.
As the investigation into the crash of Flight 708 nears completion, only one mystery remains unsolved.
It's a storm!
Munoz seems to know what was happening.
Why did the crew fail to recover from a stall that they'd been trained to overcome?
To get out of a stall, a pilot should increase thrust and pitch over, that is, push forward on the control column.
But as the recovered flight data shows, that is not what Captain Ospina did.
He was pushing
There's
back.
no indication that the pilot pushed forward on the control column to reduce the angle of attack and to increase speed.
See, that's it. Like I said, that's all they had to do.
Back on the control column.
At that point, it was impossible to recover from the stall.
The captain should have pushed forward. The question remains, why didn't he?
I feel like fear.
Investigators get their first clue when they re-examine the engine data at the
Like,
precise moment of
when
the
you're
storm.
going down, you obviously want the plane to go up.
At the time that the airplane stalled, we also saw that both engines rolled back at the same time. This most likely confused the pilots.
When airflow to the engines is disrupted, it causes a rollback, reducing thrust.
Because of the updrafts that in the area, it most likely increased the angle of attack of the engine inlet, which then caused the engines to roll back.
With his engine power temporarily reduced, the captain wrongly concluded that his engines had quit.
It's a stall!
First officer yelled, "It's a stall, Cappy. It's a stall."
Yeah, he knew it was a stall. I feel like he should have taken over.
This showed that the captain was fixating most likely on the engines.
Yeah.
Unaware he had stalled, the captain made things worse by pulling back on his control column. That kept the nose of the plane angled dangerously high.
Tell him we've had a flameout on both engines. We've had a flameout on both engines.
La tripulación no supo
The crew couldn't understand the situation presented to them.
que se les presentó.
West 708, go down to level 240.
Do you have a problem on board?
He had vision tunnel or whatever it's called, tunnel vision.
They had a heavy buffet from the stall.
Yeah.
They were looking at the engines, which were rolled back, and they were also communicating with the air traffic controller. During that time, there was not much troubleshooting going on in the cockpit. This was a very, very difficult time for the pilots.
They were pretty high up.
Very important
A
that
stall,
the crews
they
communicate
should
in an
have tried
effective
fixing
way.
the stall first.
And in this case, you don't hear the two pilots communicating between themselves.
Yeah.
Y no hubo comunicación efectiva entre ellos.
They were panicking.
It was an almost silent cockpit until the time just before the accident,
Hasta el momento que
when they realized they were in deep trouble.
del accidente se dieron cuenta que estaban en graves problemas.
But by that time, it was already too late. They were past the point of no return.
Yeah,
During that
a lot of these
descent,
accidents.
according to the flight data recorder, they reach a rate of descent, an average of more than 12,000 feet per minute. That rate of descent, not only the G-force will prevent them from any coordinated action, that vibration in the aircraft will be a lot.
Yeah, a lot of
That's
these
why when you hear
incidents
the
are
voice recorder,
start off
you hear the
with
voice
just it
tremble.
being a stall, and then the pilots or something else just causes things worse.
And that's because of high vibration in the aircraft.
For everyone on board, the final plunge was a nightmare, lasting almost 3 minutes.
Whiskey, Charlie, whiskey.
When Colonel Lawless Ramos and her team interview friends and family of the pilots of West Caribbean Flight 708,
How was he when he was at home?
they uncover other long-standing issues that may help explain the crew's behavior.
West Caribbean Airline was going through a very critical financial status.
Esto debido a una situación económica que atravesaba la empresa West Caribbean.
Because of West Caribbean's economic struggles, the crew members hadn't been paid for 6 months.
Que tenían aproximadamente como 6 meses que no cobraban su.
And this could have influenced the captain's concentration.
De alguna otra manera influir en la concentración del capitán al momento de atender la emergencia.
Investigators discover that Captain Ospina was forced to take a second job, moonlighting in a bar, in order to make ends meet for his family.
Evidentemente, el nivel de estrés que
the level of stress that the captain was under because of his financial situation was huge.
Es importante.
Have we solved the fuel situation yet?
I think we're getting close, Captain.
Before the accident, the crew was delayed in Colombia for hours because the airline couldn't pay for their fuel. That was their third of 4 flights that day.
La tripulación
The crew was under a lot of stress because they were already late and they didn't know if their flight would be canceled.
No se sabía si el vuelo se iba a cancelar.
It's a start! It's a stop!
Investigators also believe that the 21-year-old first officer should have voiced his opinions more clearly.
Entre el capitán y el copiloto existía una.
There was a considerable age difference between the captain and the co-pilot, and this might have intimidated the co-pilot when he needed to speak up.
Yeah, back then, I don't know how old, what year this was in, but I know now, like, they've made it to where, you know, co-pilots, yeah, you know, your senior captain is always going to be your senior. You know, obey more what they have to say. But if you know something is he's doing wrong, they made it to where now you should speak up and say your opinion to the captain, just because, you know, if you know they're doing something wrong, speak up. They encourage that now, instead of, you know, telling them, hey, you know, they're your senior, you shouldn't speak up to them, but now they encourage it just because of all these other incidents that occurred where they never spoke up.
Co-pilots and the first officers are, how old and experienced the captain is.
Yeah, all of my knowledge just comes from these videos.
To preserve their life. If they see something that's going wrong,
It's a stop, Captain! It's a stop!
And they alert the captain, and he does not react, they should react by themselves.
Yeah. You should have taken over. Like, I'm taking over.
The investigation's official report concludes that there was an insufficient level of situational awareness in both pilots.
Although the pilot's actions are in question in this flight, we also have to look at the operator. Did the operator provide proper training? We found that the training was insufficient, that they did not receive proper CRM training, and they did not receive proper stall training.
Este accidente ocurre por una cantidad de factores que no son.
This accident happened as a result of numerous factors that aren't only attributable to the crew.
En el funcionamiento de.
There were deplorable conditions in the operation of the airline.
Estas son.
And over time, these faults can lead to accidents.
Y que en el transcurso del tiempo van afectando negativamente todo el funcionamiento de la empresa.
The report makes a long list of recommendations to ensure that the tragedy of Flight 708 never happens again.
Se hizo recomendaciones de seguridad a la Autoridad Aeronáutica Colombiana.
We made recommendations to the Colombian aviation authorities to improve pilot training, specifically better training in crew communication and having a better awareness about the use of the plane's autopilot.
Del uso del piloto automático en las aeronaves MD.
After this accident occurred, the airline was grounded and it never operated again. It went bankrupt and simply disappeared.
But West Caribbean Airways did leave a valuable legacy. Better safety measures for every other MD-80 taking to the skies today.
Yeah, I don't know what the saying is, but like every safety rule or every rule is like it's written in blood. And yeah, they really are. Like I said, I love watching these videos, just because you know that a lot of these safety stuff, flying now, it is one of the safest, what is it called? Transportations in the world. And it's mostly because they've had multiple years to perfect it. Sure, obviously it's not perfect, but it's getting there. But anyways, thank you guys for watching. I'm gonna be doing more videos. And yeah, I'll catch you guys on the next one.